It's a tremendous pleasure to welcome you all here this evening for this very special event in honor of Jacqueline Novogratz, the founder and CEO of Acumen Fund. Jacqueline is an exemplar of the GSB's mantra, change lives, change organizations, and change the world. We have more than 1,000 alumni in New York alone and almost 2,000 in the tri-state metropolitan area. I'm grateful to New York alumni chapter leaders Bruce Shelton from the class of '05 and Samir Shah from the class of '91 for keeping our alumni community here so engaged, and to all of you for the myriad of ways in which you have given your time, including acting as speakers and panelists for events, conducting interviews for the admissions office, mentoring current students through our alumni mentor program, serving on reunion committees, leading and supporting alumni events, and helping to introduce our students and recent graduates to the business community in New York as part of their employment searches. Thank you, GSB alumni of New York, for all that you do for and with the GSB. And a special thanks also to our corporate sponsors this evening. Largely due to the dedication and support of our alumni, the GSB is poised to complete a historic transition from our 40-year-old, well-loved current location to our state-of-the-art new home, the Knight Management Center. Our new facility seamlessly integrates 8 buildings and 3 quads in order to support a flexible new curriculum that emphasizes personalization and personal transformation. We have had access to half of the center since January, and it has exceeded our expectations. The classrooms are bathed in natural light, and you can see students at work through the glass-walled breakout rooms at almost any time of day or night. In true California fashion, the doors of the new Arbuckle Cafe can be thrown open, connecting a sunny town square on one side and a grassy community court on the other. These inviting spaces will draw in colleagues and students from across Stanford University, as well as our alumni and the broader community. I hope many of you will return to campus this year. You'll be very proud of what you see. I also hope to welcome into the Knight Management Center 13 MBA candidates here with us this evening who have been admitted to the class of 2013. Let's have them stand and be recognized. There will be a quiz afterwards. Please join me at your tables in putting the final touches on the sales pitch if one is necessary. We look forward to welcoming all of them into this wonderful GSB family. The latest developments at the farm in physical space and curriculum are designed to ensure that we continue to educate students who will live the GSB's mantra to change lives, change organizations, and change the world, as indeed our alumni have done. The Excellence in Leadership Award that we present this evening recognizes precisely such accomplishment. Its stated purpose is to underscore the importance of leadership in business by highlighting the achievements of a senior executive and Stanford Graduate School of Business alum who has made significant contributions to the corporate world and the community. Tonight's honoree, Jacqueline Novogratz, didn't just change an organization, she created one, and she did it to change lives and change the world. Here is just some of what has been accomplished through Jacqueline's leadership. 35 enterprises in sub-Saharan Africa and the Indian subcontinent have been supported to the point where they now benefit over 36 million people, either from direct employment or improved access to food, healthcare, energy, shelter, and water. A new successful approach to tackling poverty has been developed, patient capital, which marries the rigors of venture capital investing with the social benefits of philanthropy. Millions of others have been inspired to foster change, hopefully many of whom will make their own contributions to abating world poverty through Jacqueline's book, The Blue Sweater. She recently wrote that people across the world are yearning to be connected to stories of hope. Jacqueline, your inspiring work has created many such stories for all of us to hold on to and draw strength from. Now that exemplifies excellence in leadership. To provide you more details on Jacqueline's many accomplishments, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce another accomplished leader and the winner of the previous Excellence in Leadership Award, Jeff Bukas. Jeff, a member of the MBA class of 1977, by all means, is the chairman and CEO of Time Warner. In this role, he has been responsible for moving the company from distribution to content. He managed and grew Time Warner's major programming brands, including TNT, HBO, CNN, TBS, Warner Brothers, Time, People, and Sports Illustrated. As CEO of HBO, a Time Warner subsidiary, he brought us Sex and the City, The Sopranos, 6 Feet Under, and Curb Your Enthusiasm. Successfully navigating the rapidly changing world of entertainment, media, and technology, Jeff has positioned Time Warner for the future, providing employment to tens of thousands of people and information to hundreds of millions. In addition to a number of not-for-profit boards, Jeff has been a particularly active alum and close friend of the GSB. He volunteered for his 10th and 25th reunion committees, served on the GSB advisory board from 1997 to 2002, and again from 2005 to 2010, and has spoken at The View from the Top. Please give a GSB welcome to Jeff Bukas.
Thank you, Garth. That was more than enough for me. You know, in Hollywood, most conversations, and you've heard probably that Hollywood people are a little self-involved. And the average conversation there ends with, or is interrupted by one person saying to the other, you know, all right, enough about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think about me? So tonight is about Jackie, and it is a great honor to be able to introduce Jackie and to demonstrate that this award is actually worth something, despite the fact that I got it a couple of years ago. So at the company where I work, I hope that you watch or read some of our stuff. We tell stories, and Jackie has a hell of a story. And it starts in the mid-1980s when Jacqueline was out for a run in the hills of Kigali, Rwanda. She was there as an aid worker helping local women start a microfinance bank. And those of you who have read her book or have heard her speeches may know this story, but many of you may not. So as she was jogging, she saw a young local boy in a blue wool sweater, which is what Garth was alluding to, and the sweater had a familiar pattern of zebras and mountains on it. And it stopped her in her tracks. It was identical to a favorite sweater that her uncle had given her back in the States when she was 10 years old, in which she had grown out of and then had donated to Goodwill back then. So now, years later in Kigali, she goes up to this boy and asks if she could see the label. And sure enough, her name was on the sweater. True story. So this amazing coincidence, I know it's unbelievable, obviously struck a chord of recognition in Jackie, and it was a glimpse for her at how interconnected we all are and how everything, or not everything, but some of the things each of us do can affect people's lives. We never knew that we had any effect on them. So fast forward a few years, and Jacqueline came to Stanford to get her MBA in 1989. And she had left a very promising career in international banking for Chase. And she was good at it, and for though I was in banking, it's not as boring as people say. But she was determined to focus on not-for-profit efforts. And as we know, some of the banks have actually really made an effort in becoming not-for-profit institutions. And so she focused her skills on the problems behind poverty. And the idea she cooked up was very original, which is let's use philanthropic money to make investments in businesses where the businesses can become sustaining and can address the needs of those terribly challenged markets, those communities which at first glance, because mostly they don't have capital, they don't look like good business opportunities. So not aid or support, but investment. And so she founded the Acumen Fund, which is a nonprofit venture fund. Jacqueline would be the first to admit that in those first years, the idea of using philanthropic money to start businesses serving the poor of South Asia and East Africa was not seen by many as a savvy thing to do and was perhaps borderline nuts. I don't know if she wrote a business plan, she maybe just did it, but that's how it goes with pioneers. So Acumen has now celebrated just this year the 10th anniversary of receiving its 501c3 status. So they are off and rolling. And today there are nearly 200 registered social impact funds using a combination of this model that Jacqueline invented. And those 200 funds invest in capital to create change. Acumen is still at the forefront, and Jacqueline and her team have invested $60 million in 57 countries, stretching from India to Pakistan, Kenya to Dubai, Ghana, and San Francisco. And among just to give you a feel for the kind of things that they do with this method, and Garth mentioned one of them, more than 3 million people have access to safe, affordable, and efficient energy. 7,000 people have jobs, and hundreds of millions of insecticide-treated beds have been produced. More than 330,000 farmers are growing their families' incomes with drip irrigation systems. Hundreds of thousands have access to quality sanitation in Kenya, and the model of sanitation facilities for the urban poor has been exported and will start to grow exponentially in other countries. More than 150,000 farmers have access to quality, affordable hybrid seeds in Western Kenya. The first commercial mortgages for poor people have been provided in Pakistan. More than 350,000 individuals have access to safe drinking water under some of these projects that have been seeded by Acumen's money and business plan. So this is only a partial list, obviously, to give you a feel for the scope and the nature of what they do. Just think of a couple more, which I hadn't realized. Think about counterfeit medicine and the serious threat they pose to public health and safety worldwide. Up to 30% of drugs sold in developing nations are counterfeit. And the counterfeit drug market is estimated at about $200 billion a year on our planet. In addition, up to 50% of some medicine categories in developing countries are substandard. Fake malaria and tuberculosis drugs alone have led to some 700,000 deaths. So this is a very fruitful place for really information, not just money and production. And so just last month, Acumen invested in a company that provides a way for consumers to verify that the pharmaceutical product that they are buying is genuine. And the simple concept behind this, called Sproxel, if I'm pronouncing it right, is to provide a scratch card on the medical packaging with a code that can be sent via a text message for verification. And think about the fact that mobile phones are one of the first world amenities that are so widely available in the developing world, and so people can use them to do this verification. And this is really the same kind of scratch card that you use if you're buying a phone minutes fill-up card. So it's simple, it's easy, it's cheap, it's something that the target population knows how to use and can use. It's a very smart idea. And Jacqueline and her organization recognized it because she and they are innovators. So, as Garth said, she's a business leader. She created a business, she created a model, and she created a movement. The world looks different and better because of her tireless efforts through Acumen and for her commitment to all of these works. So, Jacqueline, on behalf of the Stanford Business School and all of us, congratulations, and please accept this award.
Talk about a Stanford welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. I think we have to hire you to be our storyteller now. Speaking of stories, that was just fantastic. And Garth and the Stanford community, I can't tell you how honored and humbled I am. I think it says so much about Stanford and the values that it holds to recognize not a person, but this idea that we can use business as a tool for change, and I think that that's really what this represents. And in fact, I feel a little uncomfortable accepting the award by myself because Acumen, like any venture, particularly one that's pushing new territories, is always the result of a lot of people's efforts. And this one happens to be very much connected to Stanford's mission of changing lives, changing organizations, changing the world. Starting with Brian Trelstead and Yasmina Zaidman, who are GSB alums who have been working on the team for a really long time and whose work has made this what it is. Stuart Davidson and Margot Alexander, who are not from Stanford. They went to the other university. My board chair and founding board member really partnered with Kate Muther, Hunter Ball, you might know them from, who really were part of this from the very beginning as well. My brother Mike, who's been a board member, also from the other coast. But this whole group of individuals that really did create movement and really are connected to Stanford. And so before I jump in, though, I just also want to recognize my family and my closest friends in the world who come to visit and come to all these kinds of events. But also what's really overwhelmed me tonight is the spirit of the class of '91, that to see people who've come from around the country is just overwhelming. And so I just thank every one of you who did, and it really reminds me of how important it is to reconnect. And on that note, when you think about this award and what it means for the social sector, for social business, we had quite a loss in our class just a few weeks ago, a man named Charles McGlashan, who really represented everything that Stanford stands for and really would have been the kind of person to receive this. He had vision, he focused on the environment, he used business as a tool for that, and he helped people really dream about why this world is so beautiful and why we need to make more rational decisions as we think about preserving what we have and protecting it for many generations into the future. And so just to recognize his contribution, that we all now have to work a little bit harder to keep his spirit alive inside of all of us. So changing lives, changing organizations, changing the world. I kept thinking about, well, what does that mean and how does that connect to the work of Acumen Fund and myself? And I thought I would just actually start with how I arrived at Stanford, as Jeff said, I had left starting a microfinance bank in Kigali, Rwanda. So it was quite the juxtaposition. I kind of was wearing a dress not unlike this one, and I found myself in a sea of Patagonia shorts and Ray-Ban sunglasses, and kind of wondered how I landed there in the first place. And then I found very quickly that I was being introduced to incredible professors, frameworks, and some of the best friends in my life. Some of the professors that had huge impact And I've felt so privileged to be connected to Jim Collins, who not only taught us about big, hairy, audacious goals, but the importance of crafting a life and how you had to find purpose and passion, whatever you do. And Jeff Pfeffer, who talked about power in politics, and I argued with him all the time. And 20 years later, he asked me to blurb his book, and I said, well, I have to read it first, because I don't know if we're going to agree now. And one of us got smarter in those 20 years, and it was a privilege and an honor to blurb it for Jeff Pfeffer. And Dean Jim Patel, who wasn't a professor at the time, but who was already really bringing the ideas of internationalism and globalization into Stanford Business School. But there was no individual who impacted me then and still does, like John Gardner. And I remember meeting him like it was yesterday. I was sitting with my buddy, Tony Brown. We were listening to the professors tell us about the classes for the upcoming semester, and they were talking about financial analysis and vector analysis and the Black-Scholes theory, and it was pretty interesting. And with all due apologies. And then this elderly man walked up, dressed in this houndstooth jacket with the fedora, and with this wave of his hand, he said, why do civilizations rise and fall? Why do some of us, throughout our whole lives, renew ourselves with a sense of curiosity, being childlike well into our 80s and 90s, and other of us at age 30 sit on the couch and kind of never get off again? And I was hooked. And I marched myself up to his office that day, and I told him I wanted him to be my mentor. And he somehow wildly agreed. And it was only after that I discovered that he had been the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare under Johnson and had worked with every president since. And he was walking integrity. And sitting with him was often like sitting with a guru. He would use aphorisms all the time. I remember once I was offered this very fancy job with a political figure, and he said, well, will taking the job make you more interesting, or will it give you the opportunity to be interested in other people and other things? And I didn't take the job. It was hard. But he was right. And at other times he would say, Jacqueline, don't worry about what other people think about you, because frankly, they're too worried thinking about themselves. That's really the secret of life. But what you need to do is to commit to something bigger than yourself and focus on it, because commitment will set you free. And John would talk about big problems. He would say, if you look around the world, there are all these extraordinary opportunities. The problem is they're disguised as insoluble problems. So your job is to find those problems, don't be afraid of them, and go after them, but take small steps, because it's the only way anything ever gets done. And every day I think about John, even today. He died in the early 2000s, and I've learned a lot about legacy, because I raise money from people all the time. In fact, sometimes I walk into a room and they go to the other side of the room. And people want to talk about their legacy, their name, their ego often. John understood that the real legacy is the way we impact people, is the way we touch them. And I've understood since then, not only because he lives inside of me and I feel him, but I bet there are thousands of people just like me who consider John their mentor, and even more important, that next generation where his words flow through us into them, then they become carriers of John's life too. And I think that's really what it's all about. And in fact, I just saw Mark Monero over there, who is our contribution to the class of 2013. We've had a Stanford MBA in every class in the last 3 years who've gone through Acumen. So Stanford influences us and we influence them back. But when I was graduating from Stanford, I was going to go global again. It's my passion. And John said, you shouldn't focus on other countries until you really understand your own. You need to be rooted in your own. So I ended up at the Rockefeller Foundation, and I worked on issues of leadership and philanthropy. But you can imagine 1994, I'm taking the subway to work downtown, and I read about the Rwandan genocide. And since I had built an institution with 5 Rwandan women, I kept wondering what happened to the institution, what happened to the women. In '96, when the refugees went back, I went back to Rwanda, and I discovered that the women with whom I had started this institution had carried out every conceivable role of the genocide. They had been killed in the first hour. They'd watched their families get killed. And at least one of them was a major perpetrator. Our first executive director was one of the planners of the genocide, which would kill 800,000 people. And so I would go for every summer for a month to sit on the floors of the prisons, talk to the women, try to understand, well, what does it mean to be human, really? And what I discovered is that monsters do exist, but they don't look like we think they do necessarily. Rather, monsters live inside of all of us, and they're the broken parts, the fragments of us. And that in times of great anxiety, and I think we're in one of those times right now, it becomes easy for demagogues to prey on those fragments and those broken parts, and sometimes make us do really terrible things. And it was really with those experiences, that understanding, having been in banking, having been in microfinance, having been in philanthropy, that I saw that one, dignity is more important to the human spirit than wealth, and too often we focus on, does someone make $1 a day or $2 a day? That's not the right metric. Two, that the markets by themselves are not going to solve the problems of poverty, but on the other hand, neither is traditional aid, government, nor charity. We need new models. And so it was in 2001 when this group of people really focused on trying to think about what kind of model might work. Could there be a third way? And we started with, as Jeff said, this idea of patient capital, this idea that capital exists along a spectrum, and that if we could be more ecumenical about the way we use that capital, and rather than give it away as handouts, invest it in entrepreneurs who see the poor as full-bodied human beings that want to make their own choices, want to make their own decisions, maybe we would see a better job at getting these basic services to them. So we take philanthropic money, we invest, average investment is $1 million. We on entrepreneurs that are focused on the basics, healthcare, water, housing, alternative energy, agricultural inputs, soon education. And we leave the money for a long time, because these are entrepreneurs who aren't just starting companies that will go viral. They're working with creating new markets for people who've never had clean water, for instance, where they believe water comes from God. It's hard to convince people that it's then in their interest to pay for water. When government officials say, we give water free, where the elites say it's unethical to sell water to the poor, all of these obstacles, there's no infrastructure, there are high levels of corruption. It takes a long time for these entrepreneurs to overcome those barriers, iterate, fail, start again. And so when I started, we thought that we needed 5 to 7 year capital. We're starting to think it's more like 7 to 15 year capital. But if you deploy it and you provide it with a lot of management assistance, and you insist on measuring not only the financial returns, but also the social impact, then we will have models that ultimately will scale either through the capital markets, in the cases of some of the agricultural investments, energy, or through with government, certainly when it comes to primary health care, clean water delivery. And so, as Jeff said, we've invested about $60 million in 57 companies, and have seen in those companies co-investment, more near-term market capital of about $160, $170 million going into those companies, and 35,000 jobs, tens of millions of people getting access to services. In some ways, more importantly, we're seeing models for change, models that government can then take and make their own. One I want to share with you, because it's part of the Stanford community, is Delight. These were two guys, Sam Goldman, Ned Tozun, who were in Jim Patel's extreme affordability class. And Sam had grown up in India, where he had seen kerosene do terrible things to people. Kerosene is really the only option that people who live off the grid, and 1.5 billion people do in the world, to get electricity. If you buy it small amounts every single day, it's dangerous, it's dirty. On aggregate, it throws about 100 million tons of carbon into the environment every year. And so the question is, how do you get people who have no money and have a system that at least works for them to convert to another energy source? They started with a solar lamp that cost about $36 and had a battery on the side that would charge your cell phones or what have you. And they found that they could sell it to shopkeepers but not to individual households. And so they came out finally with a $10 model and saw sales moving faster. And recently they came out with a $6 model. We've been investing with them since the prototype stage, when they were still at Stanford, and have been moving up with them as they've moved and brought in much more traditional sources of capital, and as Jeff said, they've just surpassed reaching 3 million people with solar lights. And for anyone who's not been in the rural villages of India and Tanzania where their primary distribution is, at night when you're in the village, you cannot see your hand at night. You can't find your way to the house. And so to have that light really changes everything, the whole picture. And so Acumen has been this incredible journey about entrepreneurs who recognize that the impossible really is possible if you bring the right combination of capital, innovation, and a lot of determination. Recently, I've been asked probably too many times to talk about the future of capitalism. And is capitalism broken? Do we need to change it? And it strikes me as a very odd question in many ways, because if we look over the last 20 years, the markets, capitalism has moved 500 million people out of poverty. That's more people that have moved out of poverty than ever in human history. But it's also left us at a point in our history where 2% of us own 50% of the wealth, and 50% of us own less than 1% of the wealth. And while those numbers aren't that skewed from what we've seen historically, the difference today is that people all around the world can see each other. Everything is visible. All of this is transparent. And as human beings, we don't compare ourselves to what we made last year. We compare it to ourselves to what you made last year and what I make this year. And so that's where so much of this instability exists, but it's also where so much possibility is there. And so I think that we need to start framing the question, and this is where Stanford has such an opportunity, not around how do we fix capitalism alone. We do need to think about how we extend capitalism, but rather, what kind of ethical and moral leaders do we need who can work with the tools of capitalism as a way to change the world rather than be controlled by capitalism? How do we, in our business schools and in our own organizations, build leaders who don't use the law as an excuse for what they do, but do the right thing because it's the right thing for them to do? Who think about their actions and their decisions based on, am I increasing dignity? Am I increasing opportunity? Am I making the world different? Regardless of where they work, because I think that's so key to the philosophy of patient capital and everything that it represents. At Acumen Fund, we have a fellows program. We invest in companies, we invest in leaders, we invest in ideas. And typically we get 700 applications from 65 or more countries from around the world for these 10 spots. So we get really amazing young people who come through our program. And we not only put them in factories that make bed nets and that take rice husk and gasify it into electricity, but we spend 6 weeks with them talking about operational skills, financial skills, and then what we call moral imagination. This idea that if you can put yourself into another person's shoes and build solutions from that perspective, we would do a lot better as a world at creating those solutions. And so we have them read Aristotle and Plato and Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King to talk about these deepest human values and how we need to integrate them into the way we think about business and the way that we think about how public policy needs to interact with business. And there's one fellow that I just thought I would say something about named Josephat Byarahanga, who is a farmer from Uganda. And we placed him in Western Seeds, which now sells hybrid seeds to 350,000 farmers in Western Kenya. And they're essentially busting the state monopoly that has been the only game in town for the last 50 years. And so really opening up opportunity for smallholder farmers. And Josephat said, you know, I thought that as an African farmer, I would be really good at convincing African farmers to buy seeds that would really increase their productivity. But I was so humbled at how hard it was. I made so many cultural mistakes. And he said, so for me, leadership is like a panicle of rice. He said, because at the height of the season, rice is green, it's beautiful, it reaches to the heavens and it feeds the sky, the earth. And he said, but right before the harvest, it bends over with great humility and it touches the ground with gratitude, with thanks and appreciation. Our leaders today need to walk with that sense of audacity that they can change the problems that we have as a world, and great humility. And that humility really is most embodied in the quality of listening. We need to do a better job at listening. But that's where the opportunity really arises. That's where I'm so proud of Stanford's real focus on building leaders with moral imagination, building leaders who can navigate this highly complex world. And Seamus Haney once said that there are moments when hope and history rhyme. And although we live in a time of great chaos, of great frustration, of great fear, when I go to Stanford and I see the eyes in those kids who want to change the world and who are not do-gooders, but want to use the skills that they have to take on the toughest, most intellectually challenging, disciplined issues that we face as a world, for me, that's where hope is. And in terms of history and hope rhyming, it's because today we've never had the resources, the access, the networks, the skills, the technology ever before in human history to solve those problems. This has been an incredibly intense period over the last few months in my life, my mother and father who are here tonight, their lives, my husband Chris, and my family, my best friends, have gone through a lot of personal loss and have seen a lot of loss around us. And I've been thinking about the sense of urgency that brings to you to make change and why we need to make it further now. It also connects you. My mother always says the more people you open yourself to love, the more pain you feel, but also the more rich your life can be. And so I thought I would just leave you with a line from another one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver, who says that, I can't remember her poem now, who says that, doesn't everything die at last and too soon? So tell me, what will you decide to do with your wild and precious life? And so I thank Stanford, the whole community. I am so proud to be a part of it. I feel committed to it for the rest of my life. And none of this would happen without this community that is so dedicated to changing the world. So, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Picture. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline, for those incredibly inspirational remarks, and congratulations again. Thanks to all of you for making this a wonderful evening. I hope to see many of you at the opening of the Night Management Center at the end of the month. And in the meanwhile, thanks for coming and have a great evening. Thank you.